I lost my house because of a garden. It sounds crazy to say out loud, but that's exactly what happened. 3 months ago, while Victoria Reynolds was smiling triumphantly at the auction of my property, she had no idea that it was just the beginning of our war. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. It all started when I decided to turn my front yard into a little organic garden. As a math teacher, I've always liked things to be organized. I drew perfect lines for each row of vegetables, set up a discrete irrigation system, and kept everything spotless. It was my pride and joy, my refuge after school. It was on a Tuesday when I found the first notice clipped to my door. An official notification from the Pinecrest Gardens Homeowners Association warning about an aesthetic violation in my garden. It was signed by Victoria Reynolds, the HOA president. The next day, I rang the doorbell of Victoria's mansion on the corner. She opened the door wearing a beige cashmere set and pearls that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "Professor, right? What can I do for you?" "I'm here about the notice on my garden. I checked all the rules and there isn't any regulation against productive gardens." Victoria adjusted her expensive framed glasses and looked at me as if I were a stain on her Persian rug. Maybe not explicitly, but the manual clearly protects the community's aesthetic standards. "Your agricultural experiment doesn't match the image we keep in Pinecrest Gardens." But several neighbors have praised it. Mrs. Patel even asked for some tomato seedlings. "We'll see what the board decides, right? The meeting is next week." I spent the next few days gathering arguments. I took photos of my garden from various angles, collected letters of support from 5 neighbors, and even prepared a presentation on the environmental benefits of urban gardens. I walked into the meeting feeling confident. The community room was packed. Victoria sat at the head of the table, surrounded by 4 board members. I recognized 2 of them as her regular tennis partners. My presentation was interrupted 3 times by Victoria citing time limitations. When I finally finished, Mr. Donovan, the oldest board member, seemed impressed. The others avoided my gaze. "Let's vote," announced Victoria. "Who supports the violation notice against Mr. Marcus Williams?" 3 hands went up immediately. Mr. Donovan abstained, looking at the floor. In seconds, my garden was officially condemned. 2 weeks later, when I got home from school, I found a second notice. Victoria had called a special meeting where they updated the rules. Food-producing plants were now explicitly banned in any visible space. Reluctantly, I moved my tomatoes and peppers to the backyard. I thought that would settle the matter. I was wrong. A month later, I received an alarming email from the bank. My automatic HOA fee payment had been rejected for an invalid reference number. I called the bank right away, and they confirmed that the HOA system had rejected the payment even though the amount was correct. The next day, I found another notice on my door, default notice, pending lien. The amount wasn't the $280 monthly fee, but $5,800 including administrative fees and accumulated fines that I had never been informed about. I paid the full amount immediately, even though it nearly wiped out my emergency fund. 3 days later, I got confirmation of the payment, along with a letter stating that due to a processing error, my payment had not been registered in time to prevent the foreclosure process that had already started. I panicked. I consulted a lawyer specialized in HOA disputes who reviewed my case with a grave expression. They found some technical loopholes. The state gives HOAs broad foreclosure powers, and the deadlines for contesting have already passed. Legally, they can take your house for a debt you've already paid. That can't be legal. It's technically legal, although clearly abusive. You would need to prove bad faith, which is hard without internal documents. That's when I realized Victoria didn't just want my garden, she wanted my house. And I needed a plan. The auction day came like a death sentence. I woke up at 5 a.m. after a night nearly sleepless. I got ready meticulously, navy blue shirt, grey dress pants, and the watch my dad gave me at graduation. I wanted to look respectable when fighting for the house I'd bought with my own sweat. In the previous weeks, I had dug into every little detail of Victoria Reynolds' life. I found out she owned a corner mansion valued at $950,000, which had been refinanced 3 times in the last 5 years. I uncovered records of 4 properties sold within the complex in the last 2 years to people with the last name Reynolds, including her brother-in-law David. Every transaction happened at a price way below market value after foreclosures similar to mine. My parents, both retired teachers in their 60s, lent me their life savings, $400,000 that they were planning to use to travel after decades in the classroom. "It's your heritage, son," my dad said, his voice choked. "We're not going to let that woman steal your future." The auction was to be held in the county courthouse lobby at 10 a.m. I arrived at 9:15, my heart pounding. I sat on a worn wooden bench, watching the room gradually fill with people. At 9:47, Victoria walked in accompanied by a well-dressed man I recognized from photos as David Reynolds, her brother-in-law. She shot me a quick look before sitting 3 rows ahead. Auction number 47, property located at 824, Magnolia Lane, Pinecrest Gardens, foreclosure by the Homeowners Association. The auctioneer, a thin man with small glasses, announced in a monotone. Starting bid at $250,000. Victoria's brother-in-law discreetly flipped through the catalogue. "We have $250,000. Anyone for $260,000? I raised my numbered paddle. $260,000. Victoria turned sharply, eyes widening when she recognized me. She whispered something urgent to her brother-in-law. $270,000, said David, adjusting his tie. $280,000, I replied immediately. The auction continued like this, increasing in $10,000 increments. When we reached $340,000, I noticed David was starting to hesitate, checking messages on his phone. Victoria kept tapping his arm insistently. $350,000, he finally said, wiping his forehead. $360,000. My voice stayed steady though my hands were trembling. David opened his folder, checked some papers, and raised his hand again. $370,000. I took a deep breath. That was almost all the money I had. $375,000. Silence. David leaned toward Victoria, who gestured frantically. He shook his head no. $375,000 bid. Any other offers? The auctioneer scanned the room. Last chance. $375,000, first time, second time. Sold to paddle number 83. I closed my eyes, a mix of relief and disbelief washing over me. I had just bought back my own house. Victoria stood up in a fury, grabbing her brother-in-law's arm. You had authorization to go up to $400,000. What happened? The investor backed out at the last minute, he mumbled. He said the price was too high for the neighborhood. When I stepped forward to sign the documents, Victoria glared at me. I hope you're happy, Professor. You spent a fortune keeping a roof over your head, but you'll still have to obey our rules. Your little garden is still banned. I find it interesting you mention rules, Mrs. Reynolds, I replied calmly. Especially considering how many you yourself break. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? We'll have time to discuss that at the next HOA meeting. In the following weeks, I turned my dining room into an operations center. I pinned up documents, photos, and diagrams on the walls, all connected with colored strings. I created a detailed timeline of Victoria's abuses. Besides my own situation, I documented 5 foreclosures in the last 18 months, all following the same pattern of administrative errors. 3 of these properties were acquired by Victoria's direct relatives at below-market prices. An unapproved change made to the facade of Victoria's mansion by installing an Italian fountain that violated the very aesthetic uniformity rules she imposed. Documents showing that Victoria hadn't paid her own HOA fee for 3 months while she was in Europe, without any fines applied. I also found unexpected allies. Mr. Donovan, the board member who abstained during the original vote, visited me after he learned that I got my house back. Leaning on his cane, he admitted that Victoria had threatened to implement special fees for accessibility modifications if he didn't go along with her demands. "She's been manipulating everyone for years," he said, his fingers tightening around the cane handle. "Many are scared. Others just don't see the bigger scheme." Mr. Donovan even provided access to meeting minutes showing how Victoria systematically changed rules for her own benefit, including a specific clause allowing ornamental fountains, just 3 weeks before she installed hers. I started discreetly reaching out to other owners. Mrs. Patel, a 67-year-old widow who nearly lost her house because she missed a payment during a hospital stay. The Rodriguez family, repeatedly fined for parking a work truck at the entrance while Victoria's son-in-law's boat faced no penalties. And Michael Chen, who had his solar panel project denied while Victoria approved a similar system for her close friend on the parallel street. We created a secure messaging group called Owners for Transparency. In 3 weeks, we had 47 members, more than 60% of the Pinecrest Gardens homeowners. In the first week of November, we distributed flyers calling for a special HOA meeting, as allowed by the bylaws when requested by more than 50% of the owners. Victoria tried to cancel the event citing scheduling problems, but Mr. Donovan, as vice president, kept the date. On the night of the meeting, the community center was packed. Victoria arrived 10 minutes late, pausing at the door when she saw the crowded room. Her confident look faltered for a moment. "What does this unauthorized meeting mean?" she demanded, addressing the main table. "This is a meeting fully authorized by the bylaws, Article 7, Section B, I said, standing up. "And we have a quorum for binding votes." Victoria laughed nervously. "And who are you to cite the bylaws to me? I've been on this board for 12 years. Long enough to know how to bend the rules," Mrs. Patel from the second row said, surprising everyone with her firmness. I walked to the front of the room and connected my laptop to the projector. For the past 2 months, I've been documenting a systematic pattern of abuses perpetrated by the current HOA leadership. I started showing the slides, each detailing a specific violation. Mrs. Reynolds used her position to initiate questionable foreclosures, from which her own family benefited financially. The murmurs in the room grew louder when I showed the list of properties and their new owners. "That's defamation. I'm suing you," Victoria shouted, though her voice lacked its usual confidence. "We've also discovered that Mrs. Reynolds broke several of the very rules she used to punish other owners." I displayed side-by-side photos. Victoria's ornamental fountain contrasted with a memo rejecting similar requests from other residents, her son-in-law's boat parked for weeks versus the fines imposed on the Rodriguez family's truck. And most importantly, there is a clear financial conflict of interest. Mrs. Reynolds approves or rejects projects based on personal connections, not on the written rules. Mr. Donovan slowly stood up, leaning on his cane. "As the vice president of this board, I've witnessed these irregularities for far too long. I formally move for a vote to remove and elect a new president." Victoria looked stunned. "You can't do this. I have a 2-year mandate. The bylaws allow for removal with cause by a 2/3 majority," I replied, handing out copies of the relevant document. "All this evidence constitutes just cause." Michael Chen, a retired lawyer, stood up. "We should also consider forwarding these findings to the State Attorney General. There are signs of possible crimes here." Victoria's face completely lost its color. The vote was almost unanimous, 71 votes in favor of her removal, 4 against. Victoria stormed out before the official announcement, slamming the door behind her. Mr. Donovan took over as temporary president, scheduling formal elections for the following month. At the end of the meeting, several neighbors came over to shake my hand and share their own stories of intimidation. Mrs. Patel hugged me with tears in her eyes. "Thank you for doing what many of us were too afraid to do." As we cleared the room, Mr. Donovan pulled me aside. "There's something you should know," he said, handing me a folder. "Victoria is 3 months behind on her HOA fees. She always forgave herself, but now she's not on the board anymore." I opened the folder and saw detailed records. Slowly, a plan started forming in my mind. The folder that Mr. Donovan handed me was a treasure trove of information. Victoria Reynolds owed exactly $840 in HOA fees, 3 months' worth during her trip to Europe. Even more revealing was the discovery that years ago she had implemented a draconian policy for defaulters, allowing the HOA to start foreclosure proceedings after just 90 days of non-payment, without any further notice beyond the initial warning. She made that rule to catch unsuspecting owners, explained Mr. Donovan as he settled into a chair with difficulty. People travel, fall ill, or simply forget. Victoria turned those lapses into opportunities. I smiled as I flipped through the documentation. So, by her own policy? Yes, Mr. Donovan nodded, a spark lighting his tired eyes. Her mansion is technically eligible for foreclosure. As of today. During the following week, I went back to the same HOA lawyer who had helped me before. This time, our meeting had a completely different tone. It's perfectly legal, he confirmed after checking the documents. Ironically, Victoria created one of the strictest sets of rules in the state. She removed several homeowner protections that would normally exist. And how would that work? I asked. As a member of the HOA, you have the right to demand that the board enforce its own rules. It can't be seen as personal persecution, it must be a systematic application of the current policy. And so, at the next meeting of the temporary board, I raised the issue of overall compliance. To restore the credibility of this association, we need to ensure that our rules are applied uniformly to every owner, I argued. I suggest a full review of all delinquent accounts, followed by strict enforcement of the existing policies. The motion passed unanimously. 3 days later, violation notices were sent to 4 owners with overdue payments, including Victoria Reynolds. The next morning, I received a furious phone call from her. You think this is funny? Getting a notification by my own policy? The rules apply to everyone, Victoria, I calmly answered. You always insisted on that. This is ridiculous. I served on the board for 12 years, and a few late fees were never an issue. They were a huge issue for Mrs. Patel when her husband was dying in the hospital. And for me, when the HOA system rejected my automatic payment. A heavy silence followed before she answered, her voice now controlled. I'm going to pay everything today. That will settle this. Unfortunately, Victoria, you eliminated the late reconciliation clause yourself in 2019. Section 5.3 of the current bylaws explicitly states that once the formal notification process begins, the entire procedure must be followed regardless of any subsequent payments. She stayed silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. You can't be serious, she finally whispered in shock. I'm just following the procedure you established and used against dozens of neighbors. Mr. Donovan has already signed the authorization to start the legal process. Victoria didn't show up at the next HOA meeting, nor did she respond to the 3 subsequent notifications sent to her door. As required by the bylaws, the foreclosure process moved forward relentlessly. Exactly 45 days after the initial notice, a foreclosure auction notice was recorded for Victoria Reynolds' mansion, scheduled for January 14th. A week before the auction, I got an unexpected call. Marcus? This is Victoria. Her voice sounded different, no trace of the usual arrogant confidence. What can I do for you? Please? She hesitated, and I could hear the internal struggle. We need to talk. About my house. I agreed to meet her at the local cafe. When I arrived, I barely recognized her. Without the cashmere suit and flashy jewelry, with deep dark circles and tousled hair, she looked like a faded version of the woman who had threatened me months before. I have the money for the fees, she said immediately, placing an envelope on the table. With all the fines. It comes to $4,760, everything included. Victoria, you know it's not that simple. I took a sip of coffee. The process is already in its final stage. The auction is scheduled, the notices have been published. You don't understand, her voice trembled slightly. That house, after Harold died, is all I have left. For a moment, I felt a twinge of compassion. Funny you mention that. My house was all I had too. I saved for 10 years just for a down payment. It was different, she tried to argue, less convincingly. You broke the rules with that garden. An impeccably maintained garden that didn't violate any existing rules until you changed the bylaws specifically to target me. Then you manipulated the payment system and created fictitious fees to take my house. I leaned forward. And why? So your brother-in-law could buy it for less than market value? How many times have you pulled this scheme before me? Victoria lowered her gaze to the untouched coffee cup. What do you want, Marcus? Justice. The same system you created must be applied equally to everyone. Her eyes filled with tears. My house is worth almost $1 million. All for $4,760? That's disproportionate. Exactly what Mrs. Patel said when she almost lost her house for $580. And what I argued when I had to pay $5,800 for a supposed system error. Victoria ran her hand through her hair in despair. Please. I can sell the house normally, recover my assets. I just need more time. You denied that same time to everyone begging for compassion. I got up to leave. The auction is next week, as scheduled. On the day of the auction, the courthouse lobby was full. I recognized several familiar faces from Pinecrest Gardens, including Mr. Donovan and Mrs. Patel. Victoria was sitting alone in a corner, looking smaller than ever. The auctioneer announced the property. Corner Mansion, 1210, Hampton Court, Pinecrest Gardens. Starting bid at $600,000. A hand went up immediately. $600,000. I recognized the man as a local investor known for converting luxury homes into multi-apartment buildings. $650,000, offered another participant. Victoria watched, pale, as the price of her house climbed in $50,000 increments. When the bid reached $800,000, only two bidders remained, the real estate investor and a woman on the phone. $850,000, said the investor, looking determined. The woman on the phone agreed. $900,000. Victoria slumped in her chair, covering her face with her hands. The investor hesitated, then finally shook his head no. $900,000, first time, the auctioneer announced. $900,000, second time. Sold to paddle number 47. The woman on the phone stepped forward to finalize the deal. Victoria finally got up, staggering toward the exit. I followed her into the corridor. Victoria. She turned around, red-eyed and with makeup smudged. Happy now? My life is ruined. The buyer is a real estate agent, I said. Representing an anonymous buyer. So what? What difference does it make who's going to live in my house? I handed her an envelope. This is a rental contract. The new owner is willing to rent the house to you for $2,800 a month, at market rate. For 1 year, renewable. She took the envelope, confused. Who would do that? Someone who, unlike you, believes no one should lose their home because of power plays. Her eyes slowly widened in understanding. You bought my house? Technically, my parents bought it as an investment. I talked at length with them about this cycle of revenge. We decided that someone had to break it. Victoria opened the envelope with trembling hands, checking the terms. Why would you do that for me? After everything? I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for the community. To show that we can be better than a system designed to punish minor mistakes with catastrophic consequences. I left Victoria in the corridor, deep in thought over the contract. As I walked out, I saw Mrs. Patel waiting. Are you really going to let her stay in the house? She asked, incredulous. Yes. But under fair rules, with a transparent contract. No hidden traps or surprise fees. I smiled. And with the freedom to plant whatever she wants in the garden. The next week, an extraordinary HOA meeting unanimously approved a new set of bylaws that required multiple notifications before any legal action, capped fines and fees, and created an independent review committee for disputes. That night, when I went back home, I paused to admire my front garden. The seedlings for the new garden were starting to sprout in perfectly organized rows: tomatoes, lettuce, eggplants, and basil. The next day, Mrs. Patel would come by to pick up some seedlings for her new garden. Across the street, I noticed Victoria watching silently. Our eyes met briefly. She hesitated, then did something I never expected. She nodded subtly in recognition before continuing on her way. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. It wasn't friendship or reconciliation, it was something more basic, the reluctant respect between adversaries who finally understood each other. I turned my attention back to the young plants, watering them carefully. Some lessons, like these seedlings, need time to grow fully.